life. So let's start with the global trends. And as I did since March 18th, I came up with a particular theme that represented the big picture, the macro trend of what's going on right now. And let's just go through some of the ones that I think were really the most interesting and culture changing, for the last 21 weeks or so. And we began on March 18th, and it was like, okay, wow. Our president was telling us we shouldn't really worry about this. Not that we should believe anything he says anyway. We saw that it was being more contained in China. We haven't really seen anything here in our country. And many of us thought, okay, well, if there's one country that's going to succeed at killing this thing, it's us. And we've also heard from many people that, okay, it's really not that bad. It's like a flu. You'll get through with it. But we finally found out that it was a horrific thing that we obviously were not prepared for. And so in the beginning, when we were quarantined or asked to be sheltered in place, it was like, holy shit, like what the heck is going on? And everybody in March 25th were, teaching people how to hand wash. The one that I remember so specifically was Sheryl Sandberg with her husband, basically showing everybody. And there were songs, and people were saying, "Sing Happy Birthday twice," so that we don't really, so that we're more safe as we, deal with this surprise. And, some people were even having fun with it. Trissy Teigen and John Legend, they were doing Instagram videos, basically laughing and saying, oh my God, this is going to be a baby boom. Like, we're all going to be quarantined at home. What else is there to do but have sex? She was clearly wrong. There has definitely been a decrease in pregnancies since the birth of COVID. So that was like the week after. And then all of a sudden, it started getting more and more dire and scary. On April 15th, a month later, we were all starting to say, okay, so is it time to go back yet? I mean, people were being optimistic. People were actually, many of my friends were ready to send their kids to camp. But there's still a little bit of like anxiety. People were calling it the new normalcy. I was calling it the new anxiety. Like, what is it really going to mean to go back? We don't really know. There's nothing in place. And then on April 22nd, we saw a lot of protests, especially from the Republicans, picketing outside of hospitals and saying, why could you medical workers go back to work, but we can't? And then the week after, when our president called this the China virus, we saw that there was actually, more tension between us and China. So this is where I felt that it went from domestic division to global division. And then I was thinking about on May 13th, when most of my peers were saying, okay, we're probably not going to go back in June 1st, where most people actually thought before this time, but we're probably going to like gear up for the fall. What's going to happen? And so I called on May, after a couple months preceding May, that was the first act of a 3-act movie. And those of you who don't know about the mechanics of movie making or storytelling, you have the first act, which is really the exposition, where you're introduced to the characters, and then slowly you're thinking or seeing like what the story or what the conflict is going to be that is going to enable these characters to evolve to the final act, where we see these characters change through the experience that they had gone through. So you have the first act, the exposition, the second act, the rising tension and the storyline, and then the third act is what's the denouement, which also means the resolution and the closing. So, I thought at this act two, we were all thinking about the strategy of return. How can we open up an economy with no real plan, marketing, and also skeptical consumers, like, what's happening? And I kept on saying, hopefully there won't be a sequel. Hopefully there won't be a second wave or even a third wave that's going to cause the movie to happen again. So that was what I was thinking about on May 13th and taught in our culture class. June 3rd, in terms of Act Two, there definitely was a curveball thrown into this COVID cultural narrative. And that was after Floyd's death and the ensuing protests and how brands and consumers responded to this with the protests. And as I've been saying since the beginning, COVID has been a magnifier of all the shit that plagued our world pre-COVID. In fact, in my last Zeitguide, I always produce a annual cultural almanac every year. I've been doing it for 10 years. And the first chapter was basically the world on fire. And this was in November when I had written it. So that being said, one of the things that was magnified clearly was systemic racism in our country and all over the world. And, this accelerated our feelings of what we should be in terms of being anti-racist and how to finally dismantle systemic racism, especially in the corporate world. And we had Cindy Gallup as a Zeit guest, I think on, the June 12th, the week after, to really help us understand how to dismantle and end racism in the corporate world. So just moving through this cultural narrative, on July 15th, one of the themes I taught and thought about was, now that we were working at home and taking care of our families or ourselves or whatever or whomever or however we define ourselves in terms of being part of a family, I called this the new domesticity in the 18th and 19th century in the Western world. And we've been seeing through novels like Jane Austen, domesticity was defined by the woman being the center of the household where the man went out to work. And this was the birth of capitalism. And, there was the division between the public space and the private space. And through Zoom, where we're working together and you're seeing my home and I'm seeing yours, there's a conflation between the private and the public space. There also, thankfully, we've come a long way in terms of dismantling with the patriarchal society that has been birthed in the beginning of humanity, or born since the beginning of humanity. But we still have a long way to go. But this new domesticity, in terms of how I'm thinking of it, is the conflation of the private and public space. We are working and living at home right now. And gender dynamics, both parents, if there is a family, are, thought of equally in terms of my utopian way of thinking. I've obviously read a lot of articles and studies, World Economic Forum, I think I read, where people think that our whole fight for gender equity in the workplace and in family life has been pushed back a bit through this, where the woman is really coming, more strongly in terms of taking care of the house and taking care of the kids. But there are also a lot of stories of husbands doing more housework and helping out with the kids than ever before. So that was the new domesticity. Just a couple weeks ago, I showed that Lawrence Wright piece in the New Yorker as the opening, and we had Zeit guest, the head of creative at CBS, who's also the CEO and chairperson of Showtime, as well as, who's David Nevins, as well as Ron Simons, the four-time Tony-winning producer of Ain't Too Proud, and he was an investor in Color Purple, prolific producer. I talked about how even though production's on hold, people aren't going to see Broadway shows, this could help us think about how this cultural destruction could lead to a cultural renaissance. And what Lawrence Wright said in that New Yorker piece basically said that the Black Plagues that impacted the Middle Ages, and there were three Black Plagues, was the precursor to the Renaissance era. And we know how artistic and intellectually how intellectually developing that culture or that time period was. And so here we are, and we are it's funny because we went full throttle. I'm calling it globalize, how this pandemic here in America, and again, I know many of you are from outside the United States. I'm here, so I am definitely more being more shaped by what's happening here. However, as you know, I've been educating you all with some global perspective and pieces from around the world, especially the China Daily. But I'm calling it global eyes. You get it? Global eyes, and there are global eyes on us. And so how I'm thinking about this is that thank God, Joe Biden just nominated or just declared that Kamala Harris would be the running mate. And so, we have been feeling a lot of shame. And I feel that many of my friends around the world are really saddened by what's happening here. I mean, even though we're being represented by a horrific monster, and I can't believe I just said that, but that's how I feel. I know that we're not here to talk about politics at all, but obviously politics are shaping the zeitgeist. But, I feel that the global eyes are on us right now. And hopefully Kamala Harris will help us get Joe Biden elected. And therefore, we will be able to dismantle this horrific dictator who is leading our country to horrific consequences. And then also, I feel that there have been global eyes on us in terms of the George Floyd's death and the ensuing protests. And we're seeing more protests spread around the world. Now, there were protests before this, I mean, starting with Hong Kong and other areas in every continent, basically. And now we're seeing protests both in Belarus and Lebanon after the blow up happened. So, and then the other thing is that I find really interesting is that I'm sure, and I'm reading that many people are wondering if there is this new Cold War between the United States and China, which I'll get to when I talk about tech and review how our government wants to dismantle our use of TikTok here in the United States, because TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, and our government, or not our government, our administration, sorry, and actually, there are a lot of Democrats who aren't using TikTok anymore either, that this expunging of TikTok from American culture is a signifier of this new Cold War. So what I find so interesting is that, again, I always love to show other perspectives. And, here's China Daily that's basically making fun of the fact that Uncle Sam is saying, no TikTok, no WeChat here because you're being China and you're stealing all our data and trade secrets, and that's really bad for us. And then here you have a Chinese executive who basically is like, are we really at a Cold War? Are you really serious? So globalize. And then, as many of you have seen before, I've written this piece in November, as you can say. And in terms of like what I'm hoping gets globalized, and hopefully Biden being elected, and everybody needs to vote, we will see how this new culture that will be shaped by a new administration will hopefully enable us to really think about humanity and how we need to reboot our humanity in order to ever make this world recover from what we're going through right now. So that's global.